telling me if you don't change your lifestyle, you're going to end up in jail, dead.
Charlamagne created one of the largest black media platforms, but his ascent was not without controversy.
He could have bailed me out, but he wanted to teach me a lesson.
Charlamagne's journey was anything but glamorous, filled with accusations, arrests, and near-career-ending situations.
My wife hung out one Saturday night and she got sloppy drunk and passed out at my mama's house, and I got that.
The constant accusations are the dark and tragic aspect of Charlamagne's tale. Something happened in 2001 that had nothing to do with industry politics or radio ratings and everything to do with how the remainder of his tale would be told. Jessica Reed, a 15-year-old girl, said that at a party in Charleston, South Carolina, Charlamagne, who was 22 or 23 years old at the time, drugged and sexually assaulted her. She gave a precise and thorough account. At a party at the Shortstay Naval Recreational Center, she was given a drink that had been tainted. Her legs failed her. When she awoke after collapsing, she discovered that someone had attacked her. She visited a hospital. She called the police to report it. The results of a physical examination were consistent with sexual activity. On June 22, 2001, Charlamagne was taken into custody and charged with second-degree criminal sexual behavior with a minor. The contrary was true in his story. He claimed to have departed the party early, claimed he didn't touch her physically. DNA testing revealed that fingernail scrapings had no evidence value and that there was no semen on swabs. The charge was dropped. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation after entering a plea to a misdemeanor of contributing to the delinquency of a juvenile by supplying alcohol and narcotics. The case was closed on paper. It was only getting started in real life. The culture is cyclical. Throughout the 2010s, Charlamagne turned the Breakfast Club into a massive platform where he interviewed presidents, checked rappers, and set cultural agendas. As he grew in popularity, the past began to resurface like something that had never been truly buried. A Brilliant Idiots podcast clip that had been removed from the archive began circulating online in 2015. In it, Charlamagne was on the microphone discussing having sex with a woman who was barely lucid after adding Spanish fly, a purported aphrodisiac, to her drink. Later on, he walked it back, apologized for how he described it, claimed it was consensual, and stated it was about his wife. However, the video that was placed next to the 2001 case affected people in a way that an apology would not be able to completely heal. Then a second video from the Breakfast Club itself appeared. This time, Charlamagne described the first time he had sex with his now wife on his own program using his own microphone. She had consumed alcohol.
Why am I giving myself donkey today? Because I feel stupid. But I am just now realizing that a lot of us men in America have been raised on.
Regarding the details, he was not subtle.
I've mainly left the charges conversation alone with regard to.
He made an on-air call to his wife. It wasn't non-consensual, she denied. Then, in a typical Charlamagne move, he spun around and awarded himself the show's donkey of the day for those remarks. Usually, he saves that section for the ones he wishes to publicly humiliate.
And I've had the documents and I've had the police paperwork for years. And the reason I've left it alone was mostly because I didn't want it to contribute to the pile-on.
That was perceived by some as accountability. Some perceived it as a deliberate attempt to control the narrative and get ahead of the story before it controlled him. For Jessica Reed, it was a man with 8 million listeners and corporate support who had never really been held accountable for what she claimed he had done to her. Reed attempted to revive the criminal prosecution in 2018. That was not going to occur, according to a prosecutor. That door had been shut by the statute of limitations and the plea agreement. Nearly 20,000 people signed a petition demanding that Charlamagne be fired from the Breakfast Club. My heart remained motionless. The program continued. Reed returned in 2022 with a violence, assault, and civil complaint. The entire time, his legal team opposed it. A judge dismissed the case in November 2024 due to statute of limitations. Legal win years after the occurrence. According to a statement released by his team, the records demonstrated his complete cooperation with law enforcement and his refusal to accept responsibility for a crime he did not commit. Charlamagne consistently prevailed in the trial. However, the rules governing the court of public opinion are entirely different. Reed was given a whole platform on Tasha K's channel to recount her story from start to finish. The interview went viral. For the first time, Reed's story was told to people who had never before followed the case. Additionally, a scene from Charlamagne was shown.
When you was on the air for weeks talking about Mr. C and what he had going on, nobody said you was
Ebro Darden of Hot 97 adopted a different strategy. Planned, measured, and timed for the hardest possible landing.
You was going at Funk Flex for the non-charge that he got with regard to him and his wife. Nobody said you were...
The documents had been in his possession for years. He picked his moment wisely.
You from the Wendy Williams school of the messiness. You can't act funny when people want to talk about your personal messiness.
Charlamagne apparently began mailing cease and desist letters to those who were bringing up the matter in public at the moment Ebro decided to finally speak. And for Ebro, that was the step that went too far because Charlamagne had built his entire reputation around having no regard for other people's business. He had spied on everyone.
I remember seeing all these tweets about Beanie Siegel dissing Jay. The first tweet I saw was from Fabulous, and Fabulous was like, y'all never thought I'd see the day when Beanie Siegel dissed Jay-Z, and I was like, what?
Or during his time at Funk Flex.
I remember tweeting out that I got fired after 6-7 months of being at 100.3 The Beat, and all the blogs started running with, did Jay-Z get Charlamagne the Godfather?
When the spotlight returned to him, he now desired attorneys. The messy school of Wendy Williams. Ebro read it that way. You can't have a profession of dragging people through their darkest moments and then be startled when someone tries to do the same to you.
Really gonna get caught up in this radio, radio star, and I'm putting star in air quotes, lifestyle. Am I really gonna get caught up in the...
A new generation of listeners learned about the case for the first time each time it returned to the public eye. And immediately next to the version from 2001 was the Charlamagne of the mid-2020s, the author, the platform builder, the mental health champion, and the man who encouraged other black males to seek therapy. The version that was sending attorneys to stifle debate and the version from the podcast clips. The industry was beginning to realize the cost of his empire, and those versions did not fit well together. Charlamagne was not an overnight success story when The Breakfast Club debuted in 2010. He arrived as a man who had already been dismissed from 4 radio stations in 2 states, relocated to New York, and worked for Wendy Williams for a year and a half without a salary, just a place to stay. And the assurance that being close to the platform would someday be beneficial. It took more than 10 years of being pushed down and getting back up before it finally did. The program is now syndicated to more than 100 stations and has over 8 million monthly listeners. In 2020, it was admitted into the Radio Hall of Fame. Charlamagne became a voice that presidential candidates sought out and made time for. But the process of getting there was fraught with difficulties. The beat in Philadelphia, the 4th firing at 100.3, merits its own tale. He had spent 6 or 7 months in the city constructing something tangible. He had already paid a security deposit for a brand new Cherry Hill, New Jersey townhouse. Everything had been packed by him and his spouse. The apartment had been well cleaned. The automobile already had clothes in it. He then scheduled an interview with Beanie Siegel. Beanie smoked with Jay-Z at the time. He was placed on the microphone by Charlamagne, who then let him run.
What I just said about, men not going to do the proper work on themselves.
Beanie spent 30 to 40 minutes there. That Thursday night, the interview went viral. It was back on the air on Friday morning. Charlamagne arrived at work on Monday. He was called into the office by the program director, who informed him that they were taking a new course.
Dealing with a lot of pain and a lot of hurt and unhealed trauma, and they're projecting that pain and that hurt on the other people.
The time frame spoke for itself, but he never stated unequivocally that Hav was the one who pulled those threads. The fear ceased being background noise and turned into something he could not ignore when the season of unemployment returned to the place he had spent his entire boyhood trying to flee, not sure if radio would allow him back in. In 2015 or 2016, he began attending treatment. Not because he had reached his lowest point once more, but rather because he saw his father staring back at him in the mirror. In 2014, he married Jessica Gadsden, his high school love. A woman who had been riding with him since before all of this, who had driven him to his first radio internship when his license was suspended, who had worked with him at the mall's demo clothes store while they were both figuring things out, and who had run the same plays his father had run while he was cheating on her.
Greatest radio personality of my lifetime, right? So it's like him talking on a mic, he's mastered it.
Things he hadn't touched in years began to come to light during the therapy session. One Thanksgiving week, he received a call from his father. Charlamagne's second book, Shook One, was released that same week. Additionally, a young cousin committed suicide that same week following 4 failed attempts. Charlamagne's understanding of his own upbringing was completely altered when his father called him and dropped something on him. His father informed him that he had attempted suicide more than 30 years prior, that he had been attending therapy 2 or 3 times a week, and that he had been taking 10 or 12 different medications for his mental health. None of that had ever been disclosed to Charlamagne during his entire childhood. When Charlamagne questioned his mother about it, her response revealed just how much had been concealed in that home. The man who was telling his kid to get his life together while also losing his own had been fighting an unseen battle for all those years. Although it provided Charlamagne with a perspective he had never had before, the revelation did not justify the hypocrisy, and it served as the foundation for what he began constructing in the field of mental health. He founded the Mental Wealth Alliance with the declared objective of providing free therapy to 10,000 Black and brown individuals over a 5-year period. Under iHeartMedia, he established the Black Effect podcast network, which was created especially to give Black voices more prominence in the podcast industry. He wrote books, including several New York Times bestsellers, about worry, responsibility, and what it means to be truthful with oneself in front of others. He secured a $200 million contract renewal with iHeartMedia in December 2025, solidifying his role as the creator of one of the largest Black media networks in the nation. Subsequently, the discrepancy began to accumulate to the point that the platform could no longer silently absorb it. Charlamagne went on The View and responded in a way that caused many people to turn their heads when a particular rapper scenario started to get out of control in the public sight. He focused on systemic reasons rather than discussing the problem in detail. Toxic masculinity, unresolved trauma, and males projecting their own suffering onto others. Critics described it as a soft pass for one of the most influential figures in hip-hop, just as that figure was about to burn to the ground. There was a loud backlash. It was difficult for those who had witnessed Charlamagne take no prisoners with ordinary artists and random celebrities to understand why the same structure was suddenly absent when it came to this influential person. The damage was exacerbated by the Kendrick Andrew Schultz issue. For more than 10 years, Charlamagne and Schultz have co-hosted The Brilliant Idiots. Andrew himself talked about this run. There is a strong sense of loyalty. However, instead of using the scathing cultural criticism that first helped establish his name, Charlamagne chose to remain in his friend's defense when the feud between Kendrick Lamar and Schultz, which stemmed from remarks Schultz had made about Black women, became public. He stood up for Schultz. He allowed Schultz to promote his own story on the platform. Additionally, he did not exert the same kind of effort to hold his long-standing partner accountable as he had done for years with complete strangers. The double standard was instantly apparent to the audience. This same man had publicly criticized Post Malone for being a culture vulture and had played a part in what the rapper himself called a downward spiral into alcoholism. Drawing blood with someone he had no financial connection to was not a problem for him. However, Schultz, his business associate and podcast colleague, received an entirely different degree of grace. Then there was Joe Budden, who had receipts and had been observing all of this. Joe had carved out a niche for himself in hip-hop analysis, established his own business, and was now in a position to make statements about Charlamagne that, depending on where he was seated, had a varied impact. His main contention was straightforward. Charlamagne's ownership rhetoric was meaningless. I own this, Charlamagne. Therefore you're not going to get it. Why? Since Charlamagne is not the independent proprietor of the Black Effect podcast network, it is run by iHeartMedia. Joe was out there expressing what some members of the public had been believing, that preaching about Black ownership was having a different impact when the preacher was still getting paid by a corporation. Whether or if that is a valid criticism, Charlamagne was affected in a way that the luxury of a $200 million deal was unable to completely erase. And throughout it all, the basis of what he created, the marriage, the family, the 4 children, and the lady who has supported him since before all of this, has held. Everything else in his story revolves around that central theme. A young man from Moncks Corner who saw the pattern for masculinity set out incorrectly while growing up, followed it and paid for it, and then had to go back and start over. Born in Charleston, South Carolina, on June 29, 1978, Leonard Larry McKeely was raised in Moncks Corner, a small rural village located around 35 miles north of the city. Larry Thomas McKeely, his father, was out there preaching one gospel while leading an entirely different one. He continued to nag his kid about the negative effects of living on the streets. Continually warned him that he would wind up in jail, dead, or broke while sitting beneath the tree if he did not change his ways. The individual who issued the warning was out on the streets at that precise moment, transporting goods from the same home. Charlamagne had to face such hypocrisy head-on. When the son realized what was actually happening, the paradox struck in a different way. Don't follow my lead. Follow my instructions. That is the kind of parenting that results in a particular kind of child. Someone who observes the movements rather than the words. And young Leonard observed his father's every action. Julie Ford McKeely, his mother, had a unique build. A Jehovah's Witness, an English instructor, and a mother who kept her son in accelerated classes from 1st to 6th grade and encouraged him to read and learn. However, in the milieu he was navigating, even that became an issue. He was a movable target for his own relatives as soon as school got out because he was one of only 2 or 3 black students in his advanced classes, sitting with largely white children all day. His father's side of town produced his cousins. They taxed a child they spotted running with white males all day while sporting spectacles and a fanny pack. Beat on him, literally. Eventually, young Leonard came to a conclusion that many young people from the neighborhood make when they grow weary of losing. Get on their level if you can't defeat them. For the final time, the spectacles cracked. The fanny pack vanished. The class clown appeared. Then, gradually, something even more perilous began to emerge. In the 7th and 8th grades, he attended summer school consecutively. I was left behind in 10th. After being expelled from Berkeley High School, he transferred to Stratford High, where his mother taught. This was the administration's last-ditch attempt to keep him in line, so they put his mother inside the building. That also didn't work. However, something occurred to him that he would not publicly identify for years before any of that street mayhem had settled in. Something that, before he really realized what it was, sowed a seed in him that grew sideways for a very long time. When Charlamagne was 8 years old, a woman who had married into his family, a relative via marriage, sexually assaulted him. She eventually got divorced and left the family completely. He was 8 years old and lacked the vocabulary to describe what was happening to him. He did what young guys in the neighborhood do with things that don't compute because he didn't have the framework. He made a joke out of it. The official account, which he told for years, said that he forced her to stop because he didn't like the way her jerry curl smelled. Charlemagne's chest, which he had been keeping closed since elementary school, didn't open until he saw Tyler Perry sobbing on Oprah about an older woman who had assaulted him on national television. His initial response was bewilderment. His second response was condemnation. But after enough time, a third response became apparent. Acknowledgement. And I recall asking myself, what's wrong with him? Because of the way we rationalized it in our minds, you used to talk about it as if it were a sexual encounter when you were younger. Later, therapy would make the unexpected connection. There had been more than one instance of the molestation. Programming had been involved. When he attempted to stop her, she began calling him ugly. Informed his granny that he had a swollen nose. And because she believed it, his grandmother, God bless her, actually applied cream on the boy's nose. A child's brain was run through a specific script by all of that. It doesn't matter how uncomfortable you are. Keep quiet. People will drag you down if you don't make them happy. He carried that people-releasing wound into his teens, 20s, and career. However, in the short term, it resulted in a child who was fleeing an unidentified threat, making choices based solely on instinct for survival. He began shipping merchandise. When he was a teenager, he was arrested twice on counts of possession with intent to distribute. Cocaine with marijuana. He was surrounded by the trap life. He was watching in slow motion as people from his block caught bids and bodies, as if he already knew how the story would finish. He kept pressing the snooze button on it, but his father's warning continued to echo in his ears. Even though it took a minute, the third arrest was the one that eventually caught his attention. He was in a car's backseat. A gunshot went off. Everyone in that car went in together, even though he wasn't the one who pulled the trigger. Assault and battery with a deadly weapon was the charge. He was handcuffed in front of everyone as soon as they arrived at Stratford High School. On the same day that he was offered a bailout by his father, he declined to. He allowed him to spend 4 to 5 days behind bars. Eventually, his mother arrived with the bail funds. He was given one more chance by his father. He accepted it, but not completely and not immediately. He was truthful about that. He returned home, returned to the same surroundings, and continued to travel in the same circles until a drug arrest involving 16 of his home bars placed him in a holding tank. The shock of being back in that milieu caused him to physically throw up. That was the time. Not the warnings, not the expulsions, not the incarceration. When the arithmetic finally connected, he was crouched over in a holding cell, feeling sick to his stomach. He went in night school, graduated, and began working various jobs, including telemarketing, a flower garden, Taco Bell, a warehouse, and a clothes store called Demo in the mall. Between all of that, he entered a recording studio, met Willie Will, a Charleston local DJ, and asked him directly how he got into radio. He followed Willie's advice and obtained an internship. That was back in 1998. That was the start of his new and better life. However, somewhere on that dirt road in Monk's Corner, the fire that followed him out of that one-wide trailer is still burning. And anyone who has watched this tale for a sufficient amount of time is aware that such fires do not simply go out. Click on the ones that appear on your screen if you liked this video.